Back over here on my desktop, let's get started then with the manipulation, the reconfiguration of these WIM files to get ourselves just further along in the installation of these servers. But before we do so, I just want to bring up a quick point back on that last module where I showed you the use of the dism command. Now, the dism command has actually been around for a long period of time, and in fact, it still is available here in this version. If you type dism into the command prompt, it'll give you the long list of parameters that are associated with the command itself. But one of the great things about this version of the OS is that the entirety of these dism commands have now been wrapped up into some PowerShell commands that, for our purposes here, are perhaps just a bit more useful. I did show you the original dism use of those commands back in that previous module because PowerShell just simply wasn't available there inside of Windows PE. So here for this version, you may find yourself shifting backwards and forwards between the old school legacy command prompt dism way of applying these commands, and then the PowerShell new school way here that I'll be talking about from this point on. I do want to show you here that if we take a look at just the different modules here on this machine, that the dism module is actually one of those that is available here right out of the box. So this dism module and all the commands that exist within it are available for us because it exists here inside of Microsoft Windows. And if I take a look here, let's see, git command. Then for that dism module, I can take a look then at all the different commandlets that now exist or that are here that relate to working with these different images. So you'll see us actually working through quite a few of these different dism commandlets here from within Windows PowerShell. We have a couple of steps we need to accomplish here first so that we can now edit the contents of this install.wim. I have here on this machine attached then to it the DVD ISO for Windows Server 2016. Here is a copy of that DVD ISO and everything that exists there right after you download it from Microsoft.com. And here inside of the sources location, I told you there are two files you should be prepared for. The first is boot.wim and the second is install.wim. The boot.wim, as I mentioned, is Windows PE itself. It's what we transferred over onto our USB stick in order to create a bootable environment to then apply what we now think of as install.wim right down here, which contains all the other pieces of Microsoft Windows that need to be installed onto that awaiting piece of hardware. And so out of these, really the only file that we really need to worry about is this install.wim file right here. I have made a copy here from the Windows DVD media right over here onto our machine. So if I come back here onto the C drive, you can see I've just copied the contents of that DVD file, or a DVD ISO, right here locally. Let us then take that single file, that install.wim file, and copy it into a location where we can then manipulate it. I'll go here under Sources again, and then come down here to install.wim. And let's make that copy here to right here on our C drive. Let us create a folder here called, I don't know, Hyper-V. We're creating a Hyper-V machine ostensibly. So here in this Hyper-V folder, I'll make a copy of that install.wim file. We are making a copy here because what we're about to do is actually manipulate the inner contents of this file itself. You can think of the WIM as being kind of a database or maybe a zip file, if you're familiar with zip files, that contains all the other contents, all the files and folders that will be later unpacked onto an awaiting machine. Once we have this image file then transferred here, our first task is to take a look at the different install options that exist for Windows Server 2016 and that are baked here into this copy of install.wim. I can take a look at those options here back in Windows PowerShell with the command git Windows Image right here. And the image path I'm looking for, essentially the WIM file I want to take a look at, is C, Hyper-V, and then install.wim. You'll notice here the four different options that we saw when we first plugged in this DVD ISO into an awaiting machine. There, when we went through the next finish in the graphical user interface, we had four different selections that we could choose for how we wanted to install Microsoft Windows, Windows Server here onto that machine. One of the great things about the WIM format is that consolidated into a single file, you can actually have multiple different install options for Microsoft Windows then collected there into that file. And so there in that file, we have an essentially deduplicated set of files and folders that can then be addressed by any of these four images here by its image index number. Out of these four, the one that we're most interested in here will be our data center core. This is image index 3 right here. We can, at least for this example, assume that this is the only version of Microsoft Windows that we really want to have to deal with anytime we're installing this Hyper-V infrastructure that we'll be working with. And so let's use these PowerShell commandlets here to remove out the other image possibilities so that we don't make mistakes later on. The command we want to take a look at here is remove, if I clear the screen again, remove Windows image. And again, the image path here will be C-V and then the install.wim file. And then the index that we want to remove will be index 1. Out of those 4, if you remember, it's index number 3 is the one that we want to keep. So let's remove index 1 from that list. And if I take a look here, I want to show you a very interesting behavior in terms of how this whole commandlet actually works. When you do remove index number 1, it shifts all the remaining indices up. So you have to be kind of careful with this command because we don't just want to remove 1, 2, and 4. It is now number 2 here that we want to keep here in the list. So let's go through a second time now and remove index 1 and again confirm that we have server data center core as image index 1 here in the list associated with this WIM. I'll repeat that process one more time to eliminate number 2, which is our server data center, the full GUI version of this OS. And so finally, after we get all this work done here, we should see that we now have a single installation option for Microsoft Windows that exists here in the list. This will make things easier, or essentially eliminate the potential for failure as we later go through addressing which install option we will apply to that awaiting piece of hardware.